Imagine saying just one sentence and watching the person who once controlled every conversation suddenly lose their confidence. Not because you shouted, not because you threatened them, but because for the first time, they realized they no longer controlled your mind. That moment is more terrifying to a manipulative person than any insult. Today, you'll discover the words that don't wound the ego. They cut its supply. These are not magic spells nor tricks. They are reflections of inner strength that often leave manipulation with nowhere to go. Stay until the end, because the final phrase may be the one that changes every difficult relationship you ever face. Before we begin, answer this honestly. Have you ever walked away from a conversation wondering why you felt guilty, even though you knew you had done nothing wrong? If your answer is yes, write "I choose peace" in the comments. Sometimes a single decision is the first step toward reclaiming your own mind. The greatest misunderstanding about narcissistic behavior is the belief that such individuals fear criticism more than anything else. In reality, criticism often becomes another stage on which they can defend themselves, reverse blame, or portray themselves as victims. What tends to unsettle them far more is emotional indifference. This is because many manipulative dynamics rely on a steady flow of emotional attention, whether that attention comes in the form of admiration, anger, pleading, or constant attempts to explain oneself. Every strong emotional reaction reassures the manipulator that they still occupy a central place in another person's thoughts. Even conflict can become a source of validation if it keeps the focus on them. Emotional indifference quietly interrupts that pattern. It communicates that your inner world is no longer organized around their approval, their criticism, or their unpredictable behavior. This shift does not require dramatic gestures or cold hostility. Instead, it appears in calm responses, consistent boundaries, and a refusal to be pulled into repetitive arguments. When someone discovers that their usual tactics no longer produce the expected emotional reaction, they may become frustrated because the familiar pattern of influence has weakened. This does not mean they will always withdraw or change their behavior, but it often reduces the effectiveness of strategies that depend on provoking strong emotional responses. Emotional indifference should never be confused with emotional numbness or a lack of compassion. Rather, it reflects the ability to protect one's peace without becoming consumed by another person's actions. It is the quiet confidence that comes from recognizing that your value does not depend on convincing someone to understand you, agree with you, or treat you fairly. Instead of chasing validation, you begin investing your energy in your own growth, your own relationships, and your own emotional stability. That inner shift changes the dynamic because your attention is no longer something that can be easily captured through manipulation, leaving you guided by your own principles rather than by someone else's attempts to control your emotional state. Silence is often mistaken for weakness because many people assume that strength must always be loud, immediate, and forceful. Yet silence, when chosen deliberately, can become one of the clearest expressions of self-control. In interactions with manipulative individuals, every argument, emotional outburst, or rushed explanation can unintentionally provide more opportunities for the conversation to be redirected, distorted, or prolonged. A calm pause interrupts that cycle. It signals that you are no longer reacting on impulse or allowing someone else to dictate the pace of your emotions. This does not mean refusing to communicate or avoiding necessary conversations. Instead, it means recognizing that not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every provocation requires a response, and not every misunderstanding must be corrected immediately. Deliberate silence creates space to think before speaking, reducing the chance of being pulled into endless debates where the goal is not understanding but emotional exhaustion. It also reflects confidence in your own perspective because you no longer feel compelled to defend every decision or justify every feeling. People who rely on provoking emotional reactions may find this difficult because the familiar pattern of action and reaction no longer unfolds as expected. Your calm presence changes the rhythm of the interaction without the need for raised voices or dramatic declarations. Silence also allows careful observation. Instead of focusing only on what someone says, you begin noticing how they respond when they cannot easily influence your emotions. Their impatience, repeated attempts to provoke you, or sudden changes in tone may become more visible when you are not occupied with defending yourself. In many situations, a thoughtful pause communicates greater confidence than a lengthy explanation because it shows that your words are intentional rather than impulsive. True silence is not empty or passive. It is an active choice rooted in emotional discipline, demonstrating that your peace of mind is more valuable than winning every argument or proving every point. By choosing when to speak and when to remain quiet, you reclaim ownership of your attention, your energy, and the direction of the conversation without allowing another person's behavior to determine your emotional state. Firm boundaries are often misunderstood as walls that shut people out, when in reality they are clear expressions of what you will and will not accept in your life. In relationships where manipulation is present, unclear boundaries create room for confusion, guilt, and repeated violations of personal limits. A person who regularly ignores the needs of others may test those limits in subtle ways, asking for small compromises at first before expecting increasingly larger ones over time. Without realizing it, many people begin sacrificing their comfort to avoid conflict, believing that constant accommodation will eventually create peace. Instead, this pattern often reinforces the expectation that their boundaries can always be negotiated or ignored. Establishing firm boundaries changes the dynamic because it replaces uncertainty with consistency. Rather than reacting differently each time a situation arises, you respond according to principles you have already decided upon. For example, if someone repeatedly insults you during disagreements, a boundary might be calmly stating that you will end the conversation if the disrespect continues, and then following through without anger or threats. The strength of a boundary lies not in the words themselves, but in the consistency of your actions. Manipulative individuals may challenge these limits because they have become accustomed to influencing the reactions of others. They may argue, criticize, or attempt to make you feel guilty for protecting your own well-being. These responses can be uncomfortable, but they do not necessarily mean your boundary is wrong. In many cases, resistance simply reflects that the old pattern is no longer working as it once did. Healthy boundaries are not punishments designed to control another person. They are commitments you make to yourself about how you will respond when your values or emotional well-being are repeatedly disregarded. They create space for mutual respect by making expectations clear and reducing opportunities for ongoing confusion. Over time, consistent boundaries strengthen self-respect because they remind you that your time, energy, and emotional health deserve protection. Instead of constantly adjusting yourself to fit another person's demands, you begin making choices that reflect your own values, allowing your relationships to be guided by respect, clarity, and personal responsibility rather than fear, obligation, or emotional pressure. Self-possession is the quiet ability to remain connected to your own values, emotions, and judgment, even when someone else is trying to influence them. It is not arrogance, emotional coldness, or the belief that you are always right. Instead, it is an inner steadiness that prevents your sense of identity from being constantly shaped by another person's approval, criticism, or unpredictable behavior. In relationships where manipulation becomes a recurring pattern, control often depends on creating emotional instability. One moment you may receive praise, and the next you may face blame, rejection, or confusing mixed messages. This emotional inconsistency can leave people questioning themselves and seeking reassurance from the very person who created the uncertainty. Self-possession interrupts that cycle because your confidence is rooted in self-awareness rather than external validation. You begin responding from your principles instead of reacting to every emotional shift around you. This does not mean ignoring feedback or refusing to admit mistakes. It means evaluating criticism thoughtfully instead of accepting it automatically and recognizing praise without becoming dependent on it. When you possess this kind of inner stability, your decisions become more deliberate. You are less likely to abandon your boundaries simply to avoid temporary discomfort or conflict. People who rely on influencing the emotions of others may find this difficult because the usual methods of creating guilt, fear, or self-doubt become less effective. Your calm presence communicates that your choices are guided by careful reflection rather than emotional pressure. Self-possession also encourages patience. Instead of rushing to defend yourself against every accusation or chasing every misunderstanding, you allow yourself time to think, observe, and choose your response intentionally. This creates emotional distance from situations that once felt overwhelming and reduces the likelihood of becoming trapped in repetitive arguments. Over time, this inner stability transforms the way you relate to others because your worth no longer rises and falls with someone else's opinion. You become more capable of recognizing healthy relationships built on mutual respect, while stepping away from patterns that repeatedly undermine your well-being. In this way, self-possession is not about controlling another person, but about ensuring that your own mind, decisions, and emotional balance remain firmly in your own hands. If this perspective is helping you see difficult relationships more clearly, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. There is much more to learn about protecting your peace, strengthening your boundaries, and understanding the hidden patterns that shape human behavior. Every new video is another step towards seeing with greater clarity instead of reacting from confusion. Now, let's continue. Certain calm, direct phrases have a unique strength because they reduce misunderstanding without inviting unnecessary conflict. In conversations where manipulation is present, emotions often become the main target. A simple disagreement can quickly turn into a debate about your character, your intentions, or your memory of events. The more emotionally charged the discussion becomes, the easier it is to lose sight of the original issue. Calm, direct language interrupts this pattern by keeping the conversation focused and limiting opportunities for emotional escalation. Statements such as, "I see it differently," "That doesn't work for me," "I've made my decision," or "I'm not willing to continue this conversation if we can't speak respectfully," communicate clarity without hostility. These responses neither attack the other person nor surrender your own perspective. They simply define your position in a respectful and consistent way. Their effectiveness comes not from clever wording, but from the emotional composure behind them. When such phrases are delivered with confidence rather than anger, they become more difficult to twist into another argument. Manipulative individuals may attempt to provoke longer explanations because detailed justifications often create new opportunities to challenge your reasoning or shift the discussion away from the real issue. By keeping your message brief and consistent, you reduce those openings while remaining respectful. This approach also helps you stay connected to your own intentions. Instead of speaking to win an argument or prove someone wrong, you speak to express your boundaries and values with honesty. Calm, direct communication requires practice because many people feel pressure to explain themselves repeatedly or soften every boundary to avoid disapproval. Over time, however, this style of communication builds confidence by reminding you that your thoughts and decisions do not require endless validation. It also encourages healthier interactions because your words become predictable, respectful, and grounded in personal responsibility rather than emotional reaction. The goal is never to silence another person or gain control over them. The goal is to communicate with enough clarity that your message reflects your values instead of being shaped by pressure, guilt, or fear, allowing you to remain steady even when the conversation itself becomes emotionally challenging. The desire for validation is a natural part of being human. Most people appreciate being understood, respected, and accepted by those around them. Problems arise, however, when your sense of worth becomes dependent on receiving that approval from someone who withholds it, gives it inconsistently, or uses it as a tool to influence your behavior. In manipulative relationships, validation can become a reward that is offered only when you meet another person's expectations. You may find yourself changing your opinions, ignoring your own needs, or constantly seeking reassurance in hopes of restoring harmony. Over time, this creates an unhealthy cycle in which your emotional state is determined by another person's reactions rather than your own values. Refusing to seek validation does not mean becoming indifferent to feedback or rejecting healthy relationships. Instead, it means recognizing that your identity cannot be built on the changing opinions of others. You begin evaluating yourself according to your actions, principles, and personal growth rather than the praise or criticism you receive. This shift changes the emotional balance because you are no longer chasing approval that may never be given consistently. When someone realizes that compliments no longer control you and criticism no longer defines you, many of the emotional levers that once influenced your decisions lose much of their effectiveness. This inner independence also makes it easier to make difficult choices, such as maintaining healthy boundaries or walking away from conversations that repeatedly undermine your well-being, rather than asking, "Will this person approve of my decision?" You begin asking, "Does this decision align with my values and responsibilities?" That simple change in perspective strengthens self-respect and encourages more thoughtful decision-making. It also reduces the fear of temporary disapproval, allowing you to remain calm even when others attempt to pressure you into changing your position. As your confidence becomes rooted in self-awareness instead of constant external reassurance, your relationships are more likely to be based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependence. You still appreciate genuine encouragement and constructive feedback, but you no longer require another person's permission to trust your own judgment, protect your well-being, and live according to the principles that give your life meaning. Many people mistake confidence for dominance, believing that the strongest person in the room is the one who speaks the loudest, wins every argument, or always has the final word. This image of confidence is often built on external displays of power rather than genuine inner stability. True confidence operates very differently. It grows from a deep understanding of your own values, strengths, limitations, and purpose. It does not require constant comparison with others because it is rooted in self-awareness rather than competition. A person with inner stability does not need to prove their worth through control, intimidation, or endless validation. They remain steady because their identity is not constantly threatened by disagreement or criticism. In difficult relationships, this distinction becomes especially important. Someone who relies on dominance may attempt to influence others through pressure, emotional intensity, or the need to always be right. They often view every disagreement as a challenge to their status. In contrast, a person with genuine confidence can tolerate differences of opinion without feeling compelled to defeat or humiliate the other person. They understand that disagreement does not diminish their value. As we come to the end of this journey, remember that the most powerful words are never those spoken to control another person. They are the words that remind you who you are when someone else tries to make you forget. Manipulation loses much of its influence when it can no longer shape your emotions, your decisions, or your sense of self. The quiet confidence to remain calm, the courage to set clear boundaries, the wisdom to stop seeking approval from those unwilling to give genuine respect, and the strength to walk away from endless emotional battles are not signs of weakness. They are signs of a mind that has learned to stand on its own foundation. There will always be people who misunderstand your silence, challenge your boundaries, or mistake your peace for surrender. Let them. Your purpose is not to convince everyone to see your value. Your purpose is to live in a way that no longer requires constant permission, validation, or acceptance from those who refuse to offer it. The moment you stop chasing control over others and begin mastering your own thoughts, reactions, and choices, you discover a freedom that cannot easily be taken away. If there is one lesson to carry with you, let it be this. The greatest victory is not making someone fear you. It is becoming someone who no longer fears losing the approval of those who thrive on controlling others. When your peace is no longer negotiable, your boundaries become unshakable, your confidence becomes authentic, and your life begins to reflect the quiet strength that has been within you all along.